want to extend a really warm welcome to Lynn Borton, who is going to be speaking with us today as part of a new speaker series on digital writing and narrative design, which is a program that we've just launched here at Marymount, combining technology and storytelling. Lynn is also doubling as our Sigma Tau Delta English Honor Society speaker, so I'm pleased to see lots of English folk in here as well. And this is hopefully something that suggests some of the innovative ways we're thinking about the work of literature analysis and writing here at Marymount. A bit of housekeeping for those of you who are in my class. Just before I get into the introduction of Lynn, just remember that Easter break is coming up, and you should use that time both, of course, to relax and rejuvenate, but also to connect with your podcasting teammates. Just be sure that you've been in touch with everybody on your team, exchange contact information, start talking about your podcast project. And my hope is that this event will really get your creative ideas flowing. All of our next week's work will be up on Canvas, so just look at that and let me know if you have any questions. We're getting started on Waiting for Godot, so that should be exciting as well. Welcome to Lynn, who is radio host for Choose to Be Curious, which is a show that airs on WERA FM, part of Arlington Independent Media. I think it's on its 139th episode now. Is that right, Lynn?
I think that's right. It's right about there. 139, 140, right about there.
Yep. Yeah. Which is fantastic. She describes herself as a facilitator of conversations and of transformation. And she has domain expertise actually in strategic governance, change management in nonprofit contexts. She actually worked, I was really excited to know this. I don't think I knew this about you, Lynn, but she worked for more than 20 years with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And she's long focused on inclusive, interactive, and iterative approaches to support leaders in in achieving personal and various organizational goals. Her radio show, Choose to Be Curious, synthesizes the study of curiosity into something that we can, I think, all appreciate, an exciting path to personal and professional well-being and success and satisfaction. She's devoted herself in her radio show to getting people thinking and talking about curiosity, which is really what we're going to be doing today. So Choose to Be Curious is actually also the 2020 editor's pick for the Best of Arlington local podcast. You can subscribe to Choose to Be Curious on iTunes and Stitcher, and you can also access her podcast at lynnborton.com, and you can see all of the speakers she's had in really since you've been archiving them.
It's the beginning. Yep.
Yeah, since the beginning, and I'll pop that link in the chat as well. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so please join me in welcoming our 2021 Digital Writing Narrative Design speaker, Lynn Borton. Yay!
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, what an introduction. Thank you for that. So before I get started, I want to just, speaking of putting things into the chat, I want to ask you all, as you're listening over the next couple of minutes, to put the ideas that you've had, for those of you who are going to be doing a podcast, about a theme that you might have. And even if you aren't in the class that's about to do a podcast, drop into the chat sort of interesting ideas that you think would make for interesting podcast, an interesting theme. You're not committing to anything. You're just dropping ideas in here. Put as many as come to mind. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's hip hop, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's favorite family recipes, whatever it is. Just drop them into the chat while we get started.
Okay.
So my theme, of course, is curiosity, as Tanya has said, and my show is Choose to Be Curious. It's mostly interviews, conversations about how curiosity shows up in work and life. And I've been asked to talk about how I got into radio and podcasting and my writing process. So the writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie did a TED Talk on the danger of a single story, which is all about the perils of thinking we know everything about someone from a single idea we have about who they are. So although I'm the one who's been invited to talk today, I want to bring another perspective into the room right away. This is one from a former Marymount student who is now a film student at American University, Becky Lake. Some of you may know her. She was assigned to do a short character sketch and asked me if she could focus on me, in part as a way to tell the story of Arlington Independent Media, of which WERA is a part, and where I got all of my training. Everything I know about radio and podcasting is all a credit to AIM, so a shout out to AIM. Becky was actually an intern at AIM while she was at Marymount, which is how we originally met. And I want you to notice what she does and doesn't tell you. So Tanya, take it away.
And let me know if the audio quality is wonky. Just pop it in the chat if anybody has difficulty. Okay.
You're listening to WERA LP, Arlington, Virginia, 96.7 FM, streaming and on demand at WERA.FM. Coming to you from Arlington Independent Media, I'm your host, Lynn Borton, and this is Choose to Be Curious. Welcome. This is a show all about curiosity. We talk about research and theory, but mostly it's conversations about how curiosity shows up in work and life. I don't know why radio. It would never have occurred to me that I would end up in radio. If you'd asked me to make a list of 100 things I thought I would be doing a year after I left a COO job, radio would never have been on that list. But what makes sense to me about it is that I've always liked the opportunity to bring people into conversation. I've always liked facilitating dialogue. And good radio is about facilitating dialogue. I got this idea of recording a series of shows inspired by things I can see from my balcony, literally sort of broadening my horizon. The inspiration for that was the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, which I literally couldn't figure out what I was looking at first, and turns out to have this wonderful curiosity story of its own. I actually had a health crisis, and when I came back from that, luckily everything was fine, and I thought, wow, I dodged a bullet. And then I thought, I think I owe my good fortune something more than the same old, same old. And my husband was close to retirement eligibility, and we kind of looked at one another and said, we've been putting off a lot until later. What if later is now? And we just sort of took a hard left turn and we both quit our jobs. He had a plan, my plan was to get a plan. I found my way to Arlington Independent Media because I heard somebody talk about a new radio station, a new community radio station that was being launched. And I thought, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that. So I came through the door to this information meeting, and the room was full of people who were excited about sharing their stories and using their skills or learning new skills. And I knew then that this was something that I wanted to be a part of, and I've never looked back. I'm not sure that I expected to like it as much as I do. You know, it's funny, I'm on this video, but I don't really like being the center of the attention. I much prefer making other people the center of attention. And the tricky thing about hosting a radio show is that at some level you are the center of attention. I mean, you are kind of the anchor for it. But I also feel like if I really do it well, the times where I like it the most, I become like the oxygen. Like, I'm essential, but I don't really want you to see me. I want you to see the life of the thing. The coolest thing is when people say to me, like, they say the word curious or curiosity, and they look at me. It's like it's completely associated with me, at least in the subset of people who are paying attention. And I take that as a measure of impact, that has risen to a level of consciousness for folks. People ask me about curiosity all the time, like, how do I define it? I ask people to define it all the time, right? And I've done 130 shows. There must be 130 different definitions that I've gotten, right? And I think my definition has really evolved, but I keep coming back to this idea that choosing to be curious is acting on this belief that there's opportunity in the unknown. And I like the idea of this combination of belief and action, because it doesn't happen unless you have some mix of both. We have curiosity that isn't intentional. I think there's innate curiosity, but its real power, I think, comes when we bring intention with it.
All right. So I just want to thank Becky for allowing me to use that. That's actually a pre-release version of this short film, and I wrote to her and I said, "Please, can I use it?" So it's not totally. She doesn't view it as totally ready, but she was ready to share it, and that will become relevant in a few minutes because I want to talk about exactly that. So I actually want you to take just a minute and make some notes about the tools that you noticed she used to tell that story. Just you can write it down on a piece of paper, just type it in, just generate a list even in your head about what did she use to tell that story. She was already familiar with my show. She knew me some. I suggested that she focus on the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge because I thought she would get nice visuals since most of my action shots for radio is me sitting in front of a computer, which does not make for very good film. She shot several hours of tape. She used B-roll of her own. She used a little iPhone movie that I took from my balcony, plus AIM B-roll. And the composer of my theme music also provided, I think, all of the soundtrack, actually. So how do you think she chose to tell the story? As you watch it, what do you think the decisions were that she was making in that? Because lesson number one on writing is to start paying attention to how other people tell a story. What works for you in what they're doing? Whose work really captures your imagination? And lesson number two, as Henry James wrote in the advice in his book, The Art of Fiction, try to be one of those on whom nothing is lost. Or as Pulitzer Prize, Nobel Prize for Literature winner Saul Bellow puts it, be a first-class noticer. Good writing, whether for digital media or any other form, starts with paying attention. And finally, I want you to just jot down the questions that you have coming out of this film. No story is complete, right? A good story both satisfies your desire to know and leaves you wondering or thinking about maybe wanting to know a little bit more. And through writing and design, you create the opportunities for your audience to feel all of that and more. That's your goal as you're doing this. So my story, where do you start? The film is one way to start the narrative arc of this talk, but there could be others. And where do I start isn't necessarily the first question you have to answer in your narrative design, but it is an inevitable choice you will have to make. So try out a bunch of different options. Try to surprise yourself and the audience. A jolt, a surprising start will kind of wake up your audience, get their attention, and frankly, give you a little more time to keep their attention. It builds a little bit of a wave that you can ride. One thing I have learned along the way that I didn't really anticipate is that digital media give you immediate feedback. You can see from YouTube or Google Analytics just exactly how many people are actually listening, viewing, or visiting your work, how long they stay, and when and where they leave. This can be sobering, but it's also very enlightening, and it can help you figure out where and perhaps why you may be losing people in a way that the printed page simply does not. Once a book is sold, how do you ever know who's ever read any of it? Digital media gives you information you might otherwise have. So allow yourself to change your mind about where to start your story or anything else, really. You should change your mind. Your thinking, your craft should improve, which will mean that your ideas about writing that once seemed okay to you will eventually seem inadequate. And that's good. That's growth, even if it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt. So whatever you do, make your start deliberate, intentional. Remember, it's a choice, and it's the first choice your audience knows about you and what you're going to be, and the story you're going to be telling. So rather than start at the beginning, I'm going to start with death, which happens to be the topic of my next show. I got the idea when I participated in a STEAM fair, that's science, technology, engineering, art, and math, for middle school students. And I was talking with kids about what they were curious about, and death came up a bunch. I thought, well, that's interesting. I need to do a show about death. So I put it on the back burner. And eventually I thought, it's about time. I think this would be a good topic in the mix of my other upcoming episodes, but who do I talk to? I mean, how do I talk about death? So I discovered there's a death positive movement that's trying to demystify death. I attended a death cafe offered by the Arlington Public Library that encourages conversation about death and everything related. I found a researcher at George Mason who is studying public attitudes about death. And eventually I found my way to Valoria Walker, a death doula, who sits with people to accompany and ease the transition as they die. We talked a lot about compassionate curiosity and the internal work that she has to do to be prepared for that role. It was not the conversation I imagined having, but it was lovely. And she gave me goosebumps. Makes for good radio. So this is my illustrative case, right? The big takeaway for where do you start is that writing and narrative design start way before you sit down to write. So take note of what you take note of and follow those threads. Keep a notebook, put notes on your phone, just keep lists, keep them somewhere. I've been holding on to this idea since October of 2019, but it was a good idea and I didn't want to lose it. Allow yourself to be surprised by what you decide to focus on. I did not see death coming as a topic, I will tell you that. And you can find these interesting ideas hiding in plain sight. Anything can be interesting if you examine it closely enough. It's actually called the transformative power of attention. Try it out. So try this. I did a show with photographer Jason Horowitz about changing your perspective. And when he assigns a kitchen photographs project where he asks his students to take 50 or 100 photographs in their kitchen. No repeats, but you start to notice things that you had never seen before in the little space of your own kitchen. So, what would be more obvious than one of life's inevitabilities as a topic for conversation? But it wouldn't have occurred to me unless I noticed it coming up in those conversations. And then play with your concept. How can you stretch it? Will it hold up? When I first started with my show, I made a list of 25 topics. Death was not on that list, that I thought I might do. I wanted to know, did this idea have legs? Would it keep my interest? Because if I'm not interested, one, the audience can tell. Two, if I can't keep my own interest, how can I expect to keep other people's interest? And three, why would I invest time on something that doesn't interest me? So in my show, I toggle between academics and what I call applied curiosity, people who maybe haven't really thought about curiosity at all before, but who've agreed to talk with me about how it shows up in their work and lives. I find that this mix, keeps it fresh for me, and I hope it keeps my audience curious about what next topic might come up, right? And I'm hoping that most people didn't see death coming next either. So your narrative design isn't just within the episode, it's about the body of your work. So as you plan for a podcast, think about where you want to go with it and how your writing and design can help you get there. And finally, you just have to have some fun with it, right? Play with the idea once you've settled on it. What else can you do with this? And then you have to be willing to make the cold contacts, to find the right people to help you tell the story. So you have to reach outside your known universe. I went to multiple layers of potential guests before landing on Valoria. And candidly, another more subtle design element for me is ensuring that I keep a really rich diversity of guests. That doesn't just happen. You have to commit to it, and it takes some extra work. But I feel like that's a really important part of what I do. And I think it's one of the reasons that audience members like the show. So, how did I get to death? My backstory. So, you heard some of my career trajectory. I've always liked to write. I did a lot of public speaking in my governance role. I never once thought about radio. But there's no question that that speech writing and those governance webinars paid off for radio. And I had this health crisis that was kind of a point of inflection for me. And in that process, I kind of decided I wanted to give a lead talk, which is like a TED talk, set it as a challenge for myself. And I decided I wanted to focus on something I was curious about and share what I was learning. I didn't want to be the expert. I just wanted to model that I was a learner and willing to share that process. And so it kind of turned out that I was curious about curiosity. And I'd gotten interested in curiosity through my COO work because I found I was better at my job, where it was my job to know everything, if in fact I didn't know everything, and that I came forward with questions and genuine curiosity. And I thought, I can't be the only person thinking about this. Surely someone out there is doing research that I can read up on. So that's what I did. I started reading up. And in November 2015, I gave my talk. That very same day, I learned about this new community radio station that was launching. And I had realized there was a lot more to say on this topic, and that I might think it was kind of fun to have more conversations about it. And Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, Big Magic, she's written some, actually, I like her fiction better than some of these other more popular books, says, don't worry about finding your passion. Find something that interests you just a little and follow that. So I was a little interested in this new community radio station and Arlington Independent Media. So I went to check it out, and I kind of fell in love with it. So I left the country for a month. It was the holidays, but the new year came, and this idea about maybe I could do a radio show with curiosity was still kind of kicking around in my head. So in January of 2016, I started taking audio production classes at AIM. I didn't know anything about engineering, sound engineering, editing, any of it. And I submitted an application, and I figured, well, worst case scenario, I've learned something. Even if I never do anything with it, I've picked up some skills and some appreciation for the work that goes into these things. And in March of 2016, I got a call. They said that the show was approved. When do you want to start? I was like, I wasn't done with my training. I didn't have any shows lined up, but I said, don't let me chicken out. I'll start in May, which is like 6 weeks off. And I was drawing on a concept called 0.8 prototyping, which comes out of MIT and change theory. And the idea is that you start before you are ready. You know whatever you are doing is half-baked, but you put it out there anyway. It's what David Kelly at IDEO calls fail fast to succeed sooner. You do something rough and rapid, and then you iterate, incorporating as much feedback as you can as you go. Turns out this is incredibly liberating because you know it's not ready. That's pretty much the whole point. So you don't have to worry that it isn't perfect. And I've been doing it ever since. So what is the doing, my process? Nuts and bolts, it's a radio show lives on as a podcast on multiple platforms. I have a website, choosetobecurious.com. So I'm writing not just for the show, but for the website as well, and for social media. And that turns out to be its own form of writing, one I definitely do not feel I have much mastery with, but I experiment. And I view this whole thing as kind of an ongoing learning enterprise and an experiment. For about a year, last year, I put out shows weekly, but that just about did me in. So I typically produce a new show every other week. And finding a production pace that gives you sufficient time to generate the caliber of work that you want to do is important. If you can't control the frequency, as may be the case with a class assignment, then you need to figure out how to organize your work and your creative energy to be sure you're delivering on that imposed schedule. You need to figure yourself out. Figure out when you're most focused, when you're most creative, allowing for the fact that those may not be at the same time of day, and then organize your work accordingly. Do yourself the favor of writing when you can do your best writing. So I have some phases of my writing process, and I'm gonna, can I share the screen here, Tanya, to show that, put this slide up? Okay.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, hold on, let me just do that. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So there it is. That's everything you need to know about the phases of my writing process. Ideation and incubation, research and reading, then writing, and of course, editing. And it's a circle. I want you to always think of it as a circle, because if you're doing a podcast, you are at various points on this circle at all times. And it's really a continuum. So you kind of, you cycle back. This is not a linear thing by any stretch of the imagination. So in the phases of, let me see if I can move this around. Okay. So the ideation incubation phase can feel more passive as stuff sort of simmers, but this is where the real seeds are sown. I make conscious efforts to always have ideas in the pipeline in various stages of development so that I don't get caught short without a show. And ideas tend to come in spurts. Sometimes I sit down for a focused brainstorming session and work up a whole host of ideas, some of which will eventually become shows, some not. Other times, inspiration kind of strikes at odd moments. However they come, keep a running list of ideas and in various states of incubation, right? Read widely, jot down your inspiration, particularly like delicious turns of phrase or people that catch your eye or just a broad concept or a conundrum that you can't quite let go of. Not all of those will be worth pursuing, but which ones are keepers and which ones you won't use isn't always immediately clear. So it's useful to give them time to percolate. Then at some point, I move on to the research and focused reading. This feels more active and can be more time consuming. But the research really helps me deepen my understanding of the topic and helps differentiate one episode from another. And it gives me more to work with, because things can get stale. 140 episodes in, it can feel easier to just churn out the same stuff over and over. So you have to be vigilant about pushing back against the sameness. I also feel I owe my guests the respect of investing time in their work and our topic. You can tell if a host hasn't done their homework for an interview, or if a narrator is just kind of making stuff up or staying on a really superficial level. Writing reveals all of that. Ask any teacher. So your writing will be richer, more nuanced, and definitely more engaging if you've actually read and thought about the topic. So then comes the writing, and you really want to craft the script. You'll need some sort of structure into which to fit your writing. You may have a formula, you may not, but you do need a plan. I once read that Harlequin romance novels have a very specific formula with all sorts of required elements, including that they all contain at least one recipe. I don't know if this is true. I've never read a Harlequin romance, but I kind of like this idea. And I thought about that as I began to put together my own show. So I have a format that I mostly follow for each show. I typically start with a clip, so a teaser that I pull from the narrative, from the interview, that I hope gives you some clue about what's coming and encourages you to stick around, right? Because on the radio, it's wholly ephemeral. People come and go. Podcast people are sitting down with a little more intention. Radio, man, you have to keep them and hold them as they're getting in and out of their car or whatever. Then I usually have a related kind of thematic opener. Typically includes what I hope is some pithy quote and some relevant research. The theme may or may not be obviously directly related to the interview. I actually like to come up with things that might seem pretty tangential, but that I managed to weave together. So, for example, I opened an interview with a neuroscientist who studies eye movement as a way to measure curiosity, with a montage on beach music in Puerto Rico. Then there's the body of the interview, and I always close with an analogy. Many shows and podcasts have a gimmick of some sort, and this is mine. I have my big jar of wannabe analogies, literal big jar. And at the end of each show, I invite my guests to join me in drawing a slip of paper from the jar and making an analogy to curiosity with whatever is on the slip of paper. So, how is curiosity like ketchup? Now, this is not a question one typically poses in the course of one's day, but there are no wrong answers. And it's an opportunity for kind of in the moment creativity. It's totally unscripted and it feels different. You can hear it in the guest voices. It gives the conversation some texture and some added energy because there's a little bit of tension there. And that's all part of that all important added design element. And for me, it's designed to drive home an underlying premise of the show, which is you can make connections between very different things if only you try. So I did an analogy tribute show, actually, when my first big jar died an untimely death, for which Tanya was a returning guest. Thank you very much for that. And then sometimes I conclude with a question or a challenge or a kind of Easter egg, a sort of random clip that didn't fit in the flow of the interview, but was too good not to share. And I can maybe sometimes close with that. But a formula is meant to be messed with, right? If it's always the same, it gets boring. So you want a narrative arc. You want something that helps you move your audience through the time they're spending with you. But you can and probably should mix it up. So structure with flexibility. I do have some regular practices I use for all of this. I have a dumping ground for notes and quotes and links and leads, just a Word document. It's a mess. I write scripted intros and outros and read those verbatim. And then I have prepared questions for the interview. And I always have more questions than I will ever use. I brainstorm lots and lots of questions. And then I kind of pick through to find the ones that I think are most interesting or that would generate, or I'm most curious or that might generate the most interesting discussion. I kind of organize them into a flow that makes sense to me, identify something as an opener and something that might be my closing question. But in an interview, you have to be willing to relinquish control. You can prepare for the loss of control, so you're not totally out of control. But Taki Telenditis, who's a senior supervising editor at Reveal on PRX and NPR, once told me that when you're recording audio or video, look for what interests you most and slow down and sink into it. That's the good stuff. And you just don't know where that's going to come in the interview, no matter how much preparation you do. So, over recording gives you some flexibility. You get more than you'll be able to fit into the time allowed. It does force you to make choices between all the stuff that you record. So it's part of the balancing act of what you're doing. And unlike writing for reading, Writing for radio, I'm writing for speaking, right? We do not talk the way we have been taught to write. And you have to find your voice. And I mean this both literally and figuratively. Literally, you have to get used to the sound of your own voice. We hear the echo of our voices in our heads, which is not what the rest of the world hears. And then it's changed through electronic media, and it isn't going to sound like what you think you sound like. That's just going to be true. And you actually have more control over how you sound than you may realize. I want my guests to feel really comfortable, so they'll open up and talk freely. I try to make my voice send that message. I've learned that if I smile the whole time I talk, people can hear it. And you can't really write for that, but you can build it in as a practice in what you're doing. And then figuratively, you need to find your voice, right? What's your written voice? Is it authoritative? Is it poetic? Is it colloquial? This is about not just what you say, but how you say it. So try different ways of saying things, literally and figuratively. What feels right? What fits you and what you want your work to say? I have also developed a whole system of visual cues to help me read the script the way I want it to sound. The page looks like poetry at best. There are multiple indentations, broken up lines, lots of dots and dashes and strings of commas, incomplete sentences. I would never write this way to give it to someone, but it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters that it works for you. And reading a script takes practice. I learned this trick from the radio source Transom, that when I'm recording, I start first by saying, "Hi, Vicki," which begins the recording, giving your voice an immediate kind of friendly warmth, and your voice will carry that right through. So record yourself and then listen to it. What do you notice? Try it again and again until you sort of get a sense of, like, how do I show up for this work that does justice to what I've written? And the perfect is the enemy of the good. There comes a point where you have to just let it go. And then you just look forward to getting closer to your goal next time. That's the beauty of a podcast. You got another episode. You get to start again. So I'm writing for speaking, but I'm also writing for listening. And one voice can be boring. So you can use music, ambient sounds. I do interviews, so by definition, there are other voices in there. I've started to create a library of sound clips. I go places and I notice sounds and I record them and I kind of dump them into files, go back to them. And you think about the texture and the pacing. It's not just talk, right? It's other things. And those can get built in. They don't just happen. You can also use sound or music to bridge awkward transitions. I can no longer listen to NPR or some of the higher end podcasts without dissecting the audio structure there. I noticed where they've got weird jumps in the tape and they use something to cover it up. And when it's done well, you don't notice that it's awkward. But when you stop and look at it, you realize, oh, like they fixed a problem there. So there's a method behind all that music. It's not just for the sound. So pay attention to what you might call the art direction. The next time you're listening to a radio show or a podcast, notice how much of your reaction to the episode is shaped by things other than the words. Notice what it does to the pacing of the show. Those additions are very powerful. You want to use them sparingly. It's really easy to kind of overdo it with the zingers and the pops and the whatever. But again, you can play with it. And then finally, you get to the editing. So sometimes portions of the script are already in my head before I even have a guest lined up or a full show concept. And I can be very attached to those lines, particularly because they've been around so long, right? That's not necessarily a good thing. Someone put it to me, you have to be willing to kill your babies. This is what editing is, right? You have to be your own first editor. Maybe you even become your best editor. Although I will tell you that's less common than people like to think it is. But like deciding how you will start a story, you have to take responsibility for editing it as well. My dad was an editor, still is, and he calls editing a gift to the writing process because good editing allows good writing to shine. On my keyboard at work for years, I had a little sticker that said TFDAS, which is a shorthand for a quote from Hemingway. The first draft of anything is S expletive. It reminds me that no matter how good I think something may be, there is always room for improvement. Even Hemingway felt this way, right? So your writing is your opportunity to find and hone and amplify your voice. Editing gets you there. Your ideas are worth the effort it takes to express them well. So I want to pause. It's a lot of me talking. I want to pause for questions, and then we're going to do a little kind of playing. But I just want to see if anybody had any questions. Let me stop sharing the screen so that I can see everybody. So any questions? I don't bite, I promise. I do a show about curiosity. I like questions.
I liked how you talked about the difficulty of doing cold calls. And I want to know, how do you go from taking that name you see on a bibliography and getting that person into an interview?
So this is a funny thing. Here I do a radio show, right? I'm doing all this talking. I'm actually an incredible introvert. Like I hate cold calling. Email is a better way to cold call than cold calling, right? Because it's a little less direct. I have found, honestly, that having a radio show increases tremendously the likelihood that people will say yes, because people like the opportunity to share what they think. And so when I say that I have this show on WERA and I'm interested, I think you're an interesting person, and I would like to bring you to a larger audience. Not everybody says yes, but a lot of people say yes. I will say, I've had a bunch of student interns who have produced shows as a part of my series. I give them total control over the episode, and they have a little bit harder time. So we have learned about the importance of kind of how to position their pitch so that it's not like I'm just an intern and I'm working on this thing, but I'm part of the production team for this show and we're interested in bringing you to the show. But I think if you start with the belief that this person should be thrilled to have the opportunity of your platform, and you make a compelling case about why that's an interesting conversation, and you're not just trying to lasso somebody who's famous or whatever, people can tell that. Yeah, boy, I still struggle with it, but you know what? The answer is always no if you don't ask, and it's only sometimes no when you do ask.
Excellent point. Thank you, Mrs. Borton.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really liked in Becky Lake's video was the way that she sort of incorporated things that seemed like details, like tiny details that didn't that weren't sort of central to the theme. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. That's sort of an interesting approach, and I've noticed it in your radio shows, and I notice it in good writing as well. Right? You mentioned it again later in your talk when you mentioned sort of finding that interesting point and sinking into it, which is a little bit different from the details, right? But I think there's something related there. So I'm wondering if you could just what's the value of the detail, a really interesting detail for you?
Well, I mean, if you think about if you're looking at a painting and you have sort of the sense of the painting, but you step forward to look at a detail, right? The detail is what draws you into the story. In the painting, the story is it's all right in front of you, but you step forward because there's a detail that captures your attention. I think for listeners, viewers, readers, consumers of any kind of media, it's the detail that hooks people, right? It's like, think of it as like Velcro, right? You need these little hooks to kind of attach you, because if it's too smooth, if there's no detail, people slide right by it. So I didn't talk to Becky about how she made the choices that she made, but I was really interested in the choices that she made. And sometimes you're working with what you've got. I did a show on my mother-in-law, who is 87 years old now. And at the age of 83 or 4, we found what became of her father. She had never known what became of her father. He disappeared from her life when she was a young girl. And this had been kind of a real struggle for her. So I brought her into the studio and I got her to tell this whole story. And we had found this thing. And somewhere about 4 minutes into my recording with her, unbeknownst to me, the audio crapped out. And so I had 4 minutes of her instead of an hour when I sat down to put the episode together. And so I worked with what I had. I had these other interviews, and I pieced them together. So it's a story now told in 4 voices instead of mostly one. I actually think it's better as a result of that. So sometimes you find yourself, working with the details because it's all you have. And that's where the willingness to kind of let go of your first idea or even your second or fifth idea until you find something that really sings becomes important. But I think things need to be sticky, and detail is sticky. Generalities are not sticky.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I like that question. Thank you.
That kind of leads into a question I had.
Yeah.
Which is, what do you think, thinking about the nature of storytelling, it sounds like your program, is flexible in its range,
Mm-hmm.
from more, abstract interviews to more, narrative styles of episodes too. And thinking about narrative, it seems like one big difference between, say, an audiobook and a podcast is that in an audiobook, the narrative is fixed and finished.
Right.
Whereas in a podcast, we'll wait for the next episode. And but what do you think, helps, either, the storytelling, within an episode, or, some podcasts that develop storytelling over a whole arc of episodes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am not brave enough to try to develop a storyline over a whole series of episodes. But that's something I would kind of like to do. I've done series kind of that are thematically linked, and that's kind of an interesting challenge, actually. In fact, the Frederick Douglass Bridge was the reason, the inspiration for a whole series of shows about things I can see from my new balcony. I moved in the course of the pandemic. And so I have this balcony with this big view, and I was curious about what I was seeing out there. So I use that as a springboard for episodes. So they're not dependent on one another in the way sort of like Serial, the podcast, is, but they're related and they have a theme. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. Like what does unite things? What has enough breath in it to carry you across the empty places between episodes. Writing for television has been radically transformed by people's binging on TV now, right? The whole idea about the sequencing of episodes and how people consume what we used to see in 30-minute increments once a week is entirely different. And it's changed that writing form. So I can imagine that if you are writing with this idea that there's a next chapter in a continuing storyline, that you want to build in foreshadowing, that you want to have some themes that you find to kind of lace through as you go, that I would probably pose questions. Show about curiosity, right? I would probably pose questions at the end of one episode to kind of get people thinking, sort of prepping them a little bit for the next episode. I know from fiction writers that they do this kind of chapter to chapter, like the hanging, the suspenseful close to kind of keep you turning the page, right? I would be thinking about things like that would draw them into the series. I want to do that anyway, but it's particularly important in the series. I don't know. It's an interesting question, and it's not a discipline that I've yet held myself to, but I think it would be a fun thing to do. I kind of like the idea of stretching myself that way, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Tanya, if there are no other questions, I did want to give everybody an opportunity to sort of play with this. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is we're all adult learners, right? So adult learners learn best by having an opportunity to really quickly use the information you've just heard, right? So I'm going to give you a chance to do that. Low stakes, don't look so worried. So storytelling is, as we were just saying, storytelling is all about the creative choices that you make. What do you see? What do you focus on? What's the heart of the tale? You can't necessarily make a great story out of nothing, but you can try. And so I want to give you a good challenge to take any topic and think about how it might apply to something that interests you. So this is where the topics in the chat come back. I want you to scroll back through the chat and pick one of the topics that are there that you think you might want to do a podcast about. No, you're not committing to anything. Just pick one. Or if you don't see anything you're interested in, just pick something. And we're just going to pretend that's the topic of your podcast. Okay. And remember, it's okay if you pick something that you're just a little curious about, just a little interested in, right? It doesn't have to be a passion. Just pick something. Has everybody got something? Yeah. I see a couple heads nodding. Okay. So we're going to develop a concept for an episode of a podcast around your theme with a single inspiration point. Okay, so this is something that I pulled off of the Marymount website last week. Leesburg, Virginia, March 23rd, 2021. The Marymount University women's soccer team announced an exciting new endeavor on Tuesday afternoon as the Saints have partnered with Washington Spirits of the National Women's Soccer League. Marymount will participate in the Spirits Alliance Partnership Program. The NWSL outfit launched the program in 2020 to create new opportunities for teens at the club, youth, and collegiate levels to collect and learn with the coaches and players of the Spirit. Members of the program have the opportunity to interact with the team from the top-notch players, coaches, and technical staff of the club. MU student athletes will have the opportunity to attend 2 of the club's first team training sessions and learn from the players and coaches. The Blue and White's coaching staff will also be able to meet and learn under the world-class staff of the Spirit. Okay, so I want you to brainstorm an episode. How would you apply your theme to this story? Think of my analogies. You can make connections between anything if you try. So what's your focus and whom might you interview? Just think a little bit about that.
So the idea is, so here's this story about women's sports and this new initiative, and it's sort of community-based, right?
Right.
And someone put video games, right, in the chat. So how would you connect video games?
How would you connect video games to this athletic partnership? Or somebody I thought I saw beekeeping back here, and I was like, oh, I love that. So how would you do a show about beekeeping and this story? What might that be?
Okay.
Could you narrow down some of the key ideas of the story again?
Sure. It went by pretty fast. So the National Women's Soccer League is doing a partnership with the Marymount women's soccer team. And it's going to give them an opportunity to work with top-notch players, coaches, and the technical staff of the club. And I guess that's sort of the highlight. So remember we just talked about details, right? What's a detail that you could pull out? So I hope nobody actually picked beekeeping, even though I think that's a very cool topic. So here's what I'm thinking on beekeeping. What if there are beehives that line the soccer field? What does the team need to know about beekeeping and whether or not they need to be worried about these beehives along the side of the field? And what's that meant in terms of emergency medical preparedness and EpiPens? And why are there beehives along the side of the soccer field anyway? What's the story there? See what I'm saying? That you would never put those things together, right? But you can, and it might actually make for a pretty interesting story, right? And if that was the story, whom might you interview? So take your own theme, and think about this story. What would you do with it? And then I want you to play with it. Give it an extra twist. What can you throw in there that might make it really stand out? Maybe it turns out that the beehives are a passion project of the president of the university, right? How would you get the president of the university to talk to you about this? Presumably she would, because this is a passion project of hers, right? When I was in elementary school, we had a creative writing program called Making It Strange. And I still think about the exercises that were in that program about how I can make things strange, or at least more interesting, right? How you make things sticky. I even remember writing a thing about opening a door and the sticky feel of the doorknob that like my brother and his popsicle fingers or whatever had been on. I remember that from like second grade. Those details, they stay with you. Okay, so now I want you to write an opening line or two for this episode that you're going to do. Remember, nobody's listening, nobody's looking. This is just you messing around with an idea. Write an opening line or two. And then, when you're ready, I want you to read it aloud and record it on your phone. Now, don't tell me you don't have your phone nearby, because I know you do. Take your phone out and record that opening line and then listen to it. And then try it again. Remember, this is 0.8 prototyping. You know this is not ready for prime time. You know this is half-baked. Don't worry about it. That's the whole point, right? Just give it a try. And once you've done that, I want you to take note. What's your plus delta? So what would you do more of? That's your plus. And what would you change? That's your delta. So as you try it, it's like, oh, I liked how I did that, but oh, I didn't like that so much. How do you keep what you want to keep, build on that, change what you need to change? All right, I can't see most of you, so I don't know whether you're doing this or not. But I hope you will, whether you do it now or not.
Yeah. There are some folks weighing in on the chat too.
Oh, good. No, I've seen a couple of things here, actually. I love this. I can't keep up with reading the chat and talking at the same time, so I hope we'll save the chat so I can read it. But I did, before we let everybody go, Tanya, I never let anybody get away without the big jar of wannabe analogies. Can we do the big jar of wannabe analogies?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So here's how we're going to do this.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to, when I do this, I bring out my jar. We fish things out from here. Can't really do that in this format. So I asked if we could break into breakout rooms of twos. So it'll be like somebody's the me and somebody's my guest. And I'm going to give you assignments on your words based on your birthday, because it's the easiest way I could figure out to do this. And your assignment is to make an analogy to curiosity with one of these 4 words. So hold on, let me pull them up. Okay. So if your birthday is in January, February, or March, how is laughter like curiosity, or curiosity like laughter? If your birthday is in April, May, or June, how is curiosity like a puppy, or how is a puppy like curiosity? If your birthday is in July, August, or September, how is curiosity like salt, or how is salt like curiosity? And if your birthday is in October, November, or December, how is curiosity like riding a bike, or how is riding a bike like curiosity? So all you need to remember is what yours is. And then when you get together with your partner, you just take turns telling them what comes to mind. And then we'll come back, and I would love to hear some of what you come up with. Remember, there are no wrong answers. It's just an opportunity to make connections because you're going to try. So we'll go into breakouts.
Breakout rooms happening right now. Right. Hey, Pierre. I think you're muted.
So we talked about it and we discussed it, and I think we came up with a great answer. So we came back to the email.
Okay, cool. What did you? Well, I'll wait. I'm curious to hear what you discovered, what you had to say. You guys are in class together, so that's wonderful. You could very easily have been paired with somebody random.
Yeah.
Let's see. So how was Curiosity like? It was Jan through March. Laughter. April. June. A puppy. July through September. Salt. That was mine. I don't know. I have to think about it. October to December. So let me broadcast this message. Okay. All right. So yeah. So I'm September. So salt. How's Curiosity like salt? What does salt do? It flavors food, right? So I think that would be a great one, right? Curiosity is like salt because it gives flavor to the world you live in, right? That's pretty good. I'm surprised at myself. Let's see, 12:54. Let's bring folks back. Okay, so Pierre and Valdir, I'm definitely curious about what your responses were. So we'll wait for Lynn to come back, and
I'm
maybe
here.
she'll ask us to put
I'm
them all in
back.
the chat or.
Yeah, so I'm interested. Well, let's put do people want to put their analogies in the chat, or want to share your analogy or your partner's analogy, or what, if anything, you learned from the exercise? Anybody?
Who was that?
Can I start?
Yeah, go
Yes,
for it.
please.
Okay, so my birthday was in September. So salt is like curiosity is like salt because with salt you need to add it into in order to spice up your food or to make it taste better. So curiosity is like salt because it makes things better.
Nice. I like it. I like it. Just sprinkle it on things, right? Very nice. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Who else? I see somebody put one into the chat. Curiosity is like riding a bike. When you begin, you fall. Yeah, with curiosity, you fall in primary assumptions. You keep with riding a bike. Just like if you keep pushing your curiosity, you will eventually learn something new. Oh, I like that. Thank you very much for that. Let's see.
Anyone do one for the puppy?
Yeah, anybody have the puppy?
That was
Like
April.
spring babies.
Yeah, spring babies.
Really? No spring babies?
I know there's spring babies out there.
I believe that for a minute. Well, doesn't matter.
Let's have one more. See if there's I'm going to have to bring out the teacher in me, right?
Okay.
One more. Let's see. I might call on. Oh, good, Mohammed. Excellent. Mohammed says curiosity is like riding a bike because you might start anxious about the subject and you might learn the more you get comfortable with it.
Oh, nice. I like that. I like that. It is like a skill, right? It's a skill. It takes some practice, but it's kind of like riding a bike, right? Once you know how to do it, you know how to do it. You can kind of bring it out anytime. Nice. Yeah. Very nice. Excellent. Yeah. So I will tell you that the inspiration for this exercise came way before I was doing a radio show. When I was in my chief operating role, I actually did a ride along with a police officer. which is a fascinating thing to do if you ever get the opportunity, to sort of see what policing in Arlington is like. So I spent a day riding around the county in this cruiser with the officer. And when I got back, one of my colleagues said, well, so like, how is that like working with the National Board of Directors? And I'm like, that is the dumbest question ever. Like, it has nothing to do with the board of directors. And then I thought, no, play with this question. And actually, this is really interesting. And, it wasn't that there was a direct relationship, but using the analogy helped me kind of think about some of the governance problems that I was working with in a different way. And I realized how powerful analogies were in opening my thinking. And so I close the shows that way because I want people's minds to feel opened and energized at the end of this show. And to me, good writing does that. It energizes the reader. And that's all I got. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so
thank you to
much.
Marymount and all of you. And this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Thank you so much, Lynn. I hope that everybody in the chat and online can, weigh in and giving your thanks to Lynn for this really wonderful talk. And I hope that we will see you again at some point in the future. And I'm excited about, seeing where we can go with Arlington Independent Media. So
yeah. And folks, feel free to, I'm going to put my email, which is just choosetobecurious@gmail.com. Feel free to email me. I have used student interns to co-produce episodes. If that's something you think you want to explore, I'm willing to have that conversation with you. It's not a small thing to take on, but it's pretty cool. And if you think you're interested, let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lynn. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And
thank you.
And we're very happy to have you here. For those of you who are in my class, I will be sticking around a little bit in the Zoom room. So if you have questions and whatnot, you can feel free to hang out. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. And I really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.